This is Canada Reads American Style, featuring two friends who love Canada Reads and Canadian literature. Welcome our host Rebecca from Michigan and Tara from Ontario. Hi everyone, it is Rebecca and Tara, and we are here with book chat number 21. And I will start out by asking Tara what she's been up to lately, although she posted some beautiful pictures. I don't know if it was yesterday or today. Of some things, at least one thing that you've been up to.
Yeah. So what Rebecca is referring to is my most recent paddle boarding session, because my friend and I, the one who got me into paddle boarding, we are determined to see how far into the fall we can continue to paddleboard. So the latest date was October 19th that we were out. It's unseasonably warm here, which is like,
Yeah.
It's scary when you think about that. It's October 19th and it's warm and we're able to go. But when we left Burlington, it was sunny, but the place where we paddleboard, a little conservation area, a lake and a conservation area, it was foggy when we got there. So we were like right in the midst of the fog. Paddleboarding. It was super cool. The leaves are changing color. There was a heron that we were, I'm going to say chasing, but like, don't worry, like people, we weren't like, we were trying to follow it around. That's a better word, which was just super fun. We had a great day of paddleboarding, and I think we're going to try it for next weekend, or like, we'll see if we can get it one more time.
Yeah.
But it was super fun.
Yeah. Anything else you've been up to?
I did go to, maybe it was in a couple of weeks, but I did go to a local event at my local library, an author event, and it was with the Newfoundland author Lisa Moore for her new book, Invisible Prisons, which is now out because I'm holding a copy in my hand. And it is a nonfiction book, and it is her. So it's Lisa Moore and Jack Whalen. And Jack Whalen is a gentleman, probably, I think he's in his 60s, late 50s, 60s, who was in basically a juvenile detention home in his teens in Newfoundland. And it's his story of how he survived it and how he and his daughter are presently trying to change laws that allow people who have been mistreated, abused in such institutions get some kind of legal reparation 20, 30, 40 years after it's happened. So wow. I haven't read it yet, but I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one sounds interesting, but it's just so sad. But
yeah, I don't think it will not be an easy. It was in the 70s in St. John's, Newfoundland. So he was a teenager at the time. So yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gosh.
What about you?
Yeah, well, I am just back a couple of days from my road trip. So I had to, as many of you may know, I'm in Michigan, and I have my nephew and his family in Kansas, and I wanted to go deliver a bunch of stuff to him. When my brother passed, I had all of his personal effects and his ashes, and I wanted to give those to him. And I thought, rather than to fly with all that stuff, I'm going to do a road trip. And I have to tell you, it was the best thing I've done. It was the most fun thing. So I just want to touch briefly on the stops I made, because some of them were very literary. I started out from Michigan. I got to Indianapolis, and I went to Loudmouth Books, which is really fascinating. And I'm going to tag all these in the show notes. But this is a queer Black woman author who last year decided, because of all the banned books, to open up a banned bookstore. So I had to go there, and it's a nice, cute little place. I did go. I did purchase a book, which I posted recently on my Instagram. And so I went there. I went to the Benjamin Harrison House, who is a president that I didn't know anything about, and had a really great time going through the home and learning about him. And I definitely want to read more about him. He was pretty fascinating. Then I went to Springfield, Illinois, and I spent one whole day doing a bunch of stuff with Abraham Lincoln. I got to see the house he lived in for 17 years with his family, the Presidential Museum, which I spent 3 hours in, saw everything. And it was probably the best museum I've seen. I bought a book that kind of goes along with the museum because I just didn't want to. I don't like taking pictures in museums. I don't really take that many pictures, but the book has all the pictures in it, which is pretty cool. And then the next day, I went to see a Frank Lloyd Wright house, so that was pretty cool. Then I was on the road again to Hannibal, Missouri. I went to the Mark Twain Museum and then the Boyhood Home. And I have to tell you, I am so embarrassed to admit this, but I'm going to be fully transparent. I did not know that Huck Finn and Tom Sawyer's, those two books were based on real people. So I did not know that. So, of course, their names were not that. He created the names, but I got to see Becky Thatcher's house and Huck Finn's house and all the stuff, and it was just so much fun. I loved it. And it's a really cute little town, and I walked around the street and stuff, or the up and down the street. It was really a lot of cute little stores and stuff. That was fun. And then I did go on a riverboat cruise on the Mississippi. I've crossed the Mississippi many, many, many times, but I've never been on it. So I got to be on the river. So that was really exciting. And then I made my way to Kansas, where my nephew lives, and north of where he is was Atchison, Kansas. And I went to see Amelia Earhart's home, where she was, her birthplace. So where she was born. She was literally born in the house. And then the Hangar Museum, which has the actual plane, the model. It's not a replica, and it's obviously not her plane since she went down in that plane, but it is a real plane that she had flown. And so it was really cool to see it and imagine how in the world she almost made it around the world in that plane. It was just phenomenal. And that's a shout out to Heather Stemp, who wrote 3 books about Amelia Earhart that I talked about and also interviewed Heather. And if it hadn't been for me reading those 3 books, I never would have gone up there to those 2 museums, and I loved it. So thank you. Shout out to Heather for that. Then after hanging out with my family for a few days, I went through St. Louis and then went to the Cahokia Mounds, which I didn't know anything about. It's a World Heritage Site. Again, I'll put a link to it. But I did one of the mounds you can climb. It has 150 steps up to the top. So I did climb up to the top, and I was really proud of myself because it actually wasn't hard. I was not huffing and puffing too much when I got to the top. So I was really proud of myself for that. And then my last stop again was in through Indianapolis, and I went to the Kurt Vonnegut Museum and Library, which is phenomenal. I highly recommend if you get a chance to go there. I've not read any Vonnegut, but I did pick up a copy of Slaughterhouse-Five, and I'm going to read it because I didn't even know what Slaughterhouse-Five meant. And I'll just leave it at that. You have to look it up yourself. But learning about him, his life, what he stood for, he is just like a new literary hero for me. And I don't know why I've just never read him. Probably because I always said I wouldn't read dead white males, but I'm changing my thoughts on that. I have to put forth some effort here. And anyway, and then I got back. I stopped in Fort Wayne to see a good friend. Made it back to Michigan, and 12 days, 1,900 miles, 1,905 miles, and I just wish I could live on the road. So, ta-da! That was my trip.
That's a good road trip. Awesome. Well, welcome back.
Thank you. It's good to be, well, yeah, it's good to be back. I'd rather be on the road, but it's good to be back. Okay, so what are you currently reading?
Okay, well, my first book that I'm going to bring for my currently reading is actually a just finished book, more than a currently reading, but it's very apropos for the October Halloween season. So I read scary books year round, but I do like to try and throw in a couple extra in October. And this one I'm actually reading for my in-person book club here locally. And it is the debut book by Marcus Kliewer, and it is called We Used to Live Here. It is creepy. Oh my gosh, Rebecca. So scary. I love the book. I loved it. But it's the type of book that I could not read at bedtime. Like I only
Oh,
read during the day. Sometimes, like if I was reading in the evening, I could read it early evening, but I was not reading it before bed because he tapped into what I find really scary. Like if I'm just out and about, like by myself in the evening, and if I'm like, I think if I turn to the side and I see blank. It's going to scare the shit out of me. And he tapped into that, which I love. I'm just a very brief setup because this is all I knew about the book. And I think you enjoy this book better if you go in like kind of blind and just go for the ride, because it spirals and you're not going to know where it's going. And it's essentially a couple, Eve and Charlie, they're a young couple, and they have just bought a new house, but it's an old house and they're renovating, maybe flipping it. I'm not quite sure if I remember that part. Anyways, Eve is home alone one night. Charlie is out somewhere, and there's a knock at her door. A snowstorm is happening. Knock at her door. She answers it. It's a family of 5, so husband, wife, 3 children. And the father says, I used to live in this house. Can I show my family around? And
Nope.
against her better, yep, nope. Against her better judgment, and because she's a people pleaser, Eve says yes, and that is right from page 1. Like he jumps right in, and then it's really cool because it's a kind of mixed media. Even before you start the narrative, there's an image of kind of a map, but it's more like pieces of different maps all collaged together with writing on them. Like, if you go into the hospital, don't look the people in the eye and stuff like that. And you're like, what am I into? Very creepy. Not graphic, except for one scene towards the end. It's quite graphic. Like, I was like, oh shit, as that's happening. But so good, like a perfect Halloween book.
Who's the author, and is this a Canadian author, and has he written other stuff?
Canadian. Yes, I wasn't familiar with him. So it's Marcus. I meant to look this up to see how it's pronounced. Kliewer, Kliewer. He is a stop motion animator. This is his
Mhm.
first book. It apparently originated as a series of short stories on Reddit.
Oh.
I don't know anything about Reddit, but I asked my oldest Keegan about it, and she knew about it. She was like, because when I was telling her about the book, she was like, "Oh, that's probably the no sleep." I think that's what. I don't know what the heck that is on Reddit, but I was like, "That's it," because he mentions it in his acknowledgments. And I guess whatever this thread is, I'm going to say forum. That's it. Reddit forum is like there's very specific rules that it has to be told as if from the point of view of someone who's experiencing it, like right there, almost like a mixed media. So that is actually worked into the book. Like there are sections that are more traditional chapters, and then it's interspersed with documents and transcripts of interrogations and interviews and stuff like that. And I think that's the series of short stories that are from which the book originated.
It's interesting, it said the film rights were snapped up by Netflix
Mm-hmm.
and it acquired by Simon & Schuster for publication even before it had been extended into a full-length novel.
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's apparently I think it's doing really, really well. Like it's been very successful. I loved it. So that was my currently reading just finished fiction, and then my currently not reading nonfiction is less spooky, but I think a little horrifying at times. It is the graphic memoir by Maurice Vellekoop called "I'm So Glad We Had This Time," and I've only maybe about a third of the way through this one. I'm really enjoying it. I love the animation, not the animation, sorry, the drawings, the artwork. It's beautiful. And it's his story of growing up in Toronto. And again, I love seeing like old Toronto especially in pictures. It's very cool. So in the 60s, uh, his family is very Christian traditionalist, and he's gay. And it's his story of growing up in that environment.
I feel like, was he interviewed, did Ali Hassan interview him on
Someone, yes, on the next chapter.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that's where I first heard of it. And then
Mhm.
Halle of River Street Writes recently did a review of it on her Instagram page. And that's when I was like, it jumped up, and I'm like, I put a library hold immediately and got the book recently. So I'm enjoying it. I think you would too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I when I heard that interview, whoever it was that interviewed him. I thought that was really interesting, and I kind of flagged that book.
Yeah.
So, well, right now I am going back to my 12 classic women authors for my goal this year because I've actually only read 6 books and it's October, towards the end of October. So I've got to hustle to finish my goal. And so I'm planning to read The Optimist's Daughter by Eudora Welty, who I believe was from Mississippi, I think. And anyway, so that's, I don't really know much about the book, to be honest with you. It's just that's what I have on my e-reader. And that is the next book I'm going to read. So I'll be obviously reporting back to about it when I've read it.
Hmm.
So that's pretty
Nice.
much it.
Yeah, I haven't read any Eudora Welty at all.
You know what's so funny? I saw her when I was a teenager. I was obsessed with Dick Cavett's show on PBS, and he interviewed all the great authors, I mean, of the time. So I remember John Irving being on and Norman Mailer, I think. I mean, just incredible. And I remember Eudora Welty being on there. So she's been on my list since I was a teenager. So I thought it's about time for me
Hmm.
to read her. So yeah, I'm
Very
excited
cool.
to tackle that.
Excellent.
Now, I'm going to go next just to say the only book I've read since the last time we had our book chat, because driving every day for up to 4 hours and then spending the rest of those days going out and seeing as much as I could, I was exhausted by the end of the night. So I put my book next to me in the hotel room and then I would just fall asleep. So I've only read one book, but it's a good one. And this is one, Tara, that you gave me as a birthday present. And I loved it. It is Cory Doctorow's Red Team Blues, a Martin Hench novel. And it's so funny because if you need a palate cleanser, pick up this book because I just thought it was really fun and engaging. I love Cory Doctorow, so I think you have to really appreciate who Cory Doctorow is as a human being because he's just so edgy to me. I just love him. But and I did interview him. And I put this on my Instagram post that on May 11th, 2020, I interviewed him about his book Radicalized, and he is just seriously the smartest human being I've ever spoken to in my spoken to one-on-one in my entire life. But anyway, so basically it's about Martin Hench, who is a 67-year-old forensic accountant who helps people recover money or whatever. But he gets involved in this crazy thing that I couldn't even explain because it's so complex what happened in the beginning of the book when the guy is hiring him for the job. I didn't really understand what the hell he was talking about. And I went, you know what, go with it. It's a
Mhm.
light book. Just go with it. And I did. And I understood it enough. So don't let that hang you up because it's still a great book. And one of the things I loved about it is one of the women he has sex with is a 60-year-old woman. I love that. I'm like, he's 67. He's having sex with a 60-year-old woman. Love that for him and for her. And I also liked that the ending wasn't, or the moment of realization or whatever of the storyline isn't this big Hollywood ending. Like it ended in the way I think in real life it would have ended. And so I love that. It was this sort of subtle ending that I think sometimes people would go like, "What? There weren't all these bombs going off and guys being shot and da da da." But I loved that about the book because it felt more real.
Mhm.
And also, there's a book too. I found out this book was published in 23. The Bezel was published in 24. It's another Martin Hench book. So I hope he keeps going on with this character because I really like him. Although I was thinking at 67, how many more years can this character go
Mhm.
on before he's too old to, do anything? So anyway, so thank you for the gift. I loved it. And I highly recommend it for a palate cleanser and just a fun book to read, a really light read. It was wonderful.
I love that character name, Martin Hench. That's a great character name. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I'm bringing 4 books to highlight that I've read since our last book chat. And I'm going to start with, it's funny when I wrote them all down, like I've read some palate cleansers, but I'm not really bringing those today. They are all unintentionally more like slow burns,
Mm.
like, and more like a character driven books, which I do read those, but I don't tend to read that many all at the same time. So anyways, as I was writing them down today, I was like, oh, interesting. Anyways, so let's jump in with the first one is Same as It Ever Was by Claire Lombardo. This was published in, very recently, I think over the summer or something. She's an American author. And the main character of this book is Julia, who is deeply flawed. She's sometimes even an unlikable character, not for very long though, but just for a little bit. But I think it wasn't more so much that I didn't like her, as there were times when I was just like, for God's sakes, Julia, just respond like a normal like just.
I love it.
So I actually really liked her, and I had this weird thing where I was like, the same time I said that, I could see myself in her, but at the same time, I'm like, I'm not Julia, but I'm like, oh my God, maybe I am Julia. So maybe that's why I've found her frustrating at times. So she's our main character, and it's her story. It's mostly her story, but it's also the story of her marriage. I don't have the husband's name here. I got the book from the library and I forgot to write it down. So it's the story of her marriage. So her as a wife, her as a mother, because her relationship with her daughter is fickle. Let's say her daughter's a teenager. She's about to graduate high school and move on to university. So it's like, it's just a normal mother-daughter relationship. But she's also, I think, it's strongly influenced by her relationship with her mother, which is not a good relationship. They can go sometimes years without seeing each other. They may have gone, because she has an older son as well. And now that I think about it, I think her daughter, who is like 18 years old, has not met her grandmother. This is in the
Wow.
book because she meets her grandmother for the first time at 18. So there's a lot of family dynamics going on. And you kind of move through it, and the really like the blossoming point of it at the beginning is that Julia meets an older woman that she forms a friendship with. And from that, something happens that affects her marriage. And then when she's young, when she's just a new mother at like 30, and then you jump forward in time and you see Julia when she's 50.
Mm.
And then this woman comes back into her life and how that affects her marriage and her whole life. I borrowed this book from the library. I wish I owned a copy because I would have highlighted the poop out of this book. There were so many great lines in it. I'm going to quote two of my favorites. This is Julia's husband saying, "Jules has never met a joke she didn't make uncomfortable." I love that one. And then this is Julia herself saying, referring to Elma, who is her daughter, receiving messages from Elma. I'm going to put in here via text. Conversely, is like being texted by William Carlos Williams, the poet who used to do like was he the Red Wagon one? It's like they're very like sparse little poems and stuff like that. So I loved that. Great thing about this book, it was an A book for me while I was reading it until I got to the last 20 pages when it became like an A plus book.
Wow.
I loved this book. It was fantastic. Such a good book. I cried at the end. That's kind of like, if I cry, I'm like, that's an A plus book. I loved it.
That's cool. That's
Yeah.
great.
Okay. My next one, let me get to my notes here. Okay. Is Sugaring Off by Fanny Britt, who's a Quebec writer, with Susan Ouriou, who is the translator from the French into the English. And Susan Ouriou also did what was the Future, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That one Canada reads in this year. So again, this book, a very quiet book, and it's more like a character study of a marriage that's slowly falling apart. And that one, again, you have, let me see what their names. So you have Adam and Marion are the husband and wife, and they're somewhere in the US. I can't remember where. They're about, I would say, middle-aged, in their 40s. Adam might be a little older, and he is surfing, and he hits a young woman with his surfboard. And I know. And then from that, what's interesting is that happens at the beginning. They then go back home to Quebec, and you get their marriage, like what happens to their marriage after this one incident. And it sounds, you're kind of like, that doesn't sound like much, but it's actually a lot can happen in your everyday life, which is what I really like about it. Because he's also a kind of a celebrity chef in Quebec when he returns to like does TV shows and his restaurant and stuff like this. She's a dentist, and then it's the accident affects him, which then affects their marriage and their relationship. What I found interesting is you don't get that young woman's story until the end, and it kind of
Oh.
changes your perception. So at this point, like I never liked Adam. Like I just he's not a likable character. He's just that typical like husband stereotype that you're not going to like. I don't know what to say, but other than you're just like he's an ass, and you feel for Mary and you have empathy. You can see where when the choices she makes, you can see why she makes them, and you're like, yeah, I get it. Like, good for you, kind of Marion. And then when you get Celia's story, and that's the young woman who is hit by Adam on his surfboard, it kind of like flips, not doesn't flip because you still dislike Adam, but it kind of you see a different side of Marion that she didn't let you see. Because I think the chapters are told you get Adam's point of view and then Marion's point of view, and then when you get Celia's point of view at the end, you see a side that Marion wasn't showing you. It's a fantastic book.
Wow.
Yeah, so I
Yeah, that
really
sounds
like that
interesting.
one. Yeah, I think you would like that one actually.
Hmm.
Yeah,
I like I like the idea of getting everybody's perspective from their point of view, because when we read, obviously, if it's a single narrator, we've got to trust that narrator, and you
yeah.
can't always trust them. And even if you think you can trust them, how interesting that you've got other people's point of view.
Yes, and just but only for, like, a little, and
Yeah.
just, like, her behavior at that moment when
Yeah.
this young woman is injured, like, how did she react and behave to this? So I always when I was reading it, I'm like, "I'm enjoying this, but I wanna know what's going on, like, what happened to this woman? Like, what" like, she got hit by a surfboard, and they do
Yeah.
describe her injuries, and they were, like, fairly substantial, like, physical injuries. So I'm like, "What? Why are we not getting her story?" And then I realized we're not getting her story because Adam and Marion didn't really care. Like, once they left and got home, they really did not care about this woman.
Yeah.
Yep,
Wow.
so, yeah. So it's it was a fantastically written. It was a very cool book. Okay. I feel like I'm zipping through these, but if you have any questions, go right ahead. Okay. My next one, another new book published just on October 1st, The Mighty Red by Louise Erdrich, which I think I now have the pronunciation down. I think I have it correct. Although
Okay.
apparently I have difficulty pronouncing pronunciation. I do. Anyways, sorry. So this is another kind of like a slow burn. It's happening. Which state? It might be around maybe Dakota, North Dakota. I think
Hmm.
it's North Dakota, where there's a sugar beet farm. The main thing is there's a young woman. It's not Crystal because that's the mom. There's a lot of characters. There's a lot of
Hmm.
characters, but there is like a a love triangle between three young characters, one girl and two young men who know each other from high school. She ends up marrying one of them, but is actually in love with the other one. So there's a
Mm.
reason why she marries him. And he's also the son of a sugar beet farmer, but like big sugar beet. Like, it's so it's Louise Erdrich, and she puts in their like short chapters. So you kind of like very propulsive.
Mhm.
And at the beginning, you're wondering, I'm like, I don't know if this is enough to carry a whole book, but then she does it and she works in like all this stuff. Like, what did I write here? She puts into it. So, family, marital relationships, friendships, mother daughter, love, grief, trauma, climate change, big farming, because there's the sugar beet farm it's a one of the big factory, like essentially like a factory farm where you're given seeds by Monsanto and said
Mhm.
you have to use these seeds and these pesticides and these herbicides and you grow it this way and it's
Mhm.
very and then but around there's also other farmers who are not doing that. It's also there's lots of indigenous characters, white characters. There's so much. It's a fantastic book. Like I love
Yeah.
again, I just keep saying this. I'm like, I love this one. Oh, this was perhaps my favorite line. And I think I sent this one to you because I think you would love it.
Mhm.
But they, referring to dandelions, were the sun when they bloomed, the moon when they formed seed heads, and the stars when you blew on the fragile globes. Like
I love
Louise
that.
is like she's amazing. Like she's
Mhm.
a fantastic writer. So I love that book. What do I have next? I have one more. Oh, I'm going to go with a nonfiction read of mine. I don't know if I told you I was reading this one. I don't think so because I started it when you were on your road trip.
Mhm.
This one mixes true crime and literary.
Ooh.
Sounds bizarre, but it is called The Real Lolita by Sarah Weinman. What she okay, let me try and set this book up because there's a lot, but there isn't at the same time. It's pretty straightforward. So we all know of Nabokov's book Lolita. What she does is she looks at the true crime story that kind of not so much inspired Lolita, but from which Nabokov drew details from when he was writing Lolita.
Oh.
And it's in, I think it was in 48, maybe 50, no, 1948
Mhm.
in New Jersey. She was 11 years old at the time. Sally was abducted by a much older gentleman. I think he was in his 50s or 60s. And he took her across country for 21 months that she was away from her family, raped multiple times throughout this. She eventually, when she was in California, so he brought her from New Jersey to California, she eventually escaped and got back to her family. And her family, she had a sister and a single mom. So Weinman takes her story and parallels it to Nabokov's writing of Lolita, because Nabokov would never admit that he drew from this story, that he even knew the story, because for him, art superseded reality. So
Mhm.
I know it essentially he was making up excuses for why he would not admit to
Mhm.
using a young woman's story and making it his own. It's essentially what it is, kind of thing, right? So she draws parallels in the story, but she alternates in chapters between the two. So I loved getting Sally's story because it's a story that is seldom is it not not well known, but Lolita is so well known and made Nabokov so much money because I have not read Lolita and I still don't want to read Lolita having
Mhm.
read this book, but I find it really, I didn't realize at the time that he wrote it that Nabokov lived in the US and was a professor at various universities. And
Oh, I didn't either.
no, and he would, but after Lolita, when it was finally published in the US, he made so much money that he left the US and moved to Switzerland, where he then spent the rest of his life, maybe tax free. I don't know, but he did not have to
Mhm.
worry about teaching anymore. So did a really great job of putting the two. You got Sally's story, and I got lots of a literary critique of Lolita at the same time and Nabokov. But mostly, she did it mostly to put Sally's story out there.
Okay, that
Yeah.
one I have to read
Yes.
because a million years ago when I had formed a book club in Sacramento with a bunch of my colleagues, librarians, one of the and what we used to do is we'd bring whoever's turn it was would bring 3 titles to the table, everybody would vote on it and pick the book, and everybody voted for Lolita, and I started to read it and I said, "Nope, I'm not reading this book." I just and I really don't think I ever will read the book, but I did not know that's what this book kind of
Yeah.
was based on. I mean, I did not know that. And it was funny too because my other colleagues, because there was one man in the group and the rest were female, and it was funny. He's the one that wanted to read that book, and then everybody voted to read it, and then I said I'm out, and then a couple of other women dropped out as well when they started to read it.
Oh,
So it's interesting, yeah. And I'm sure he read it, but I just, oh man, I am going to have to look into this now because
yeah.
that book sounds fascinating.
Yeah, it was really good, and it's like a quick read at the same time
Hmm.
because yes, as I mentioned before, I haven't read Lolita, but it's funny because you grow up like it's in our cultural sphere. It's out
Hmm.
there, right? And my impression of it, even though you know it's not right, but it's always been out there that Lolita was like the seductress, the temptress,
Hmm.
like that she
Hmm.
was active in this relationship.
Yeah.
And then when you actually hear the story, you're like, well, well, for one thing, she's a 12-year-old, like the Lolita. That's not, I can't remember her name, but not Sally, not the true story, but the book itself, the Lolita. She's a 12-year-old girl. She cannot actively seduce an
Right.
adult man, a man. It's impossible. So it's so frustrating that that's become the cultural narrative
Hmm.
to that book, is that like even through the two movies that have been made, is that's what's put out there, is that this 12-year-old girl was so beautiful and so
Hmm.
seductive that this man had no choice but to rape her.
Right.
Let's put it out there. Well, it's not a love story, it's not a relationship of any,
Right.
it's
Right.
it's
Right.
it's rape. So yeah, that's what I find that has come to my forefront from reading this book. And even Sally, this true story, Sally, when she makes her way home, so she's 13 when she gets away from this man, when she escapes and she returns home. She's, because it's 1950, like it was, there were just, the press was everywhere. So her picture was everywhere. Her name was everywhere. So there was no attempt to
Wow.
like not say who she was, right? So it was
Yeah.
everywhere. So when she returned to school, she was a slut. She was
Hmm.
like, she was made fun of, she was bullied because this happened to her,
Yeah.
right? It's messed
And she
up.
was a vulnerable victim,
Yeah,
and yet she paid the price.
yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
Wow. Well, this kind of brings up this point that I'm noticing now for myself about reading classics, which is one reason I'm so glad I've been spending this year doing that. But when I read Fahrenheit 451, again, it's that thing where it's so much part of the culture and everybody knows it, everybody references it. But when I read it, I thought, "Oh, it's not quite what I thought it was going to be." And I feel like Slaughterhouse-Five, I didn't really know what that was about, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
And then when I started going through the museum and realizing what story he was telling, I just went, "Oh my god, like, this sounds fascinating." But we build up in our minds what something is based on all the feedback we hear about it. And so that's why I think it is a really good point for us to delve into the classics
Yeah,
because
yes,
because we don't really know.
yeah.
That's so yeah, I'm totally gonna read this book though.
Oh
That's
yeah, it's
100%.
very like, and another part of it that I really liked, I know nothing about Nabokov, but I
Yeah.
didn't realize how much his wife Vera, how much she was involved in his career, not so much in the actual writing of it, but she was like his manager and stuff. When he was a professor, I think at Cornell and another university, he would be, if he had to write, like if he was like inspired to write, he would go off and write, and she would take over teaching his class for him,
Wow.
right? I'm like, who got paid for it? He got paid for it. But she would take over the teaching and the marking, and then she would do all the typing for him and stuff like this. And so, aside from that, when Lolita was published and it started going crazy and everyone's reading it and stuff like this, another interesting part that she put in the book is that Vera was upset at how the book was being taken. So she kept going, why are people not realizing that Lolita is like the innocent, the pure, the good child? And why is she being seen as a temptress when that's not what she is, and that was not the purpose of the book. Like, he didn't write the book like that,
Mm-hmm.
but that's how people were taking it. I think
Hmm.
also because he wrote that character. It's an odd name, Humbert. Is that I think that's his name, right?
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
think
Yeah.
the way that he wrote that character in such a way that people were charmed by him, which maybe was part of the deception of the book, or
Wow.
yeah, it's very
That's
it's
fascinating.
interesting, right? Like when a culture when we respond to a book differently than perhaps we think we should, or that the author intended it, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Gosh.
yeah,
Okay. Well, you've given us some amazing titles to work with here.
yeah. I had a
I'm
good reading month. I
blown
really did.
away.
Yeah,
Yeah. So, okay. Well, I think anything else you want to add, or is that everything? My gosh, you did have a great one month.
yeah.
Man.
No, I think that's good for now. I gotta
Yeah.
save some stuff for November, in case in case my November month isn't as good as my October month. I need to
Yeah.
save some.
Well, I have to laugh because I have 3 books left that I have to read by the end of the year. And then I have 6 books to read for my classics to reach my goals. So those
Mhm.
are my 2 goals so I thought those are the things I'm going to focus on.
Yep,
But I have a pile of super great things to read, but that's going to be my focus through the end of the year, or those 6, or
yeah.
no, wait, 6, 9 books that I want to
Remember,
finish by
you
the
can
end of
do
the
that.
year.
You can do that.
Oh yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
I will.
2 months, you got this.
I do.
I'm
Yeah,
not
I do.
I'm not promising to read any particular books. I'm not I refuse. I have a lot, yeah, because I keep getting ones thrown in for different reasons and holds from the library, and so I have some things in mind that I want to read,
Yeah.
and I'm just going to see if it happens.
All right.
Yeah.
All right, everybody stay tuned and we'll see where Tara and I are for the next book chat 22.
Yep. Happy reading, everyone. Thank you for joining us on our bookish journey. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, rating, and reviewing Canada Reads American Style wherever you listen. You can connect with the podcast and Rebecca on Instagram at Canada Reads American Style, and with Tara at On a Branch Reads. Until next time, keep reading.